But I want to start with the news and start with you if I can, Max, because there's been a lot of action this week, or the appearance of action, around Ukraine. And it's part of a cycle now that's a couple weeks old, which started with a 22-point plan or something to that effect for peace in Ukraine, which then it turned out was not actually generated by the Americans. It probably was generated by the Russians. The Ukrainians pushed back. The Americans did some damage control, not very effectively, I might add, by taking multiple sides in the story, and then came back with a plan that had fewer points to it. And then more recently, and some reports of progress, although who knows, and then more recently, somebody, and it's interesting to speculate as to who, leaked an audio tape that showed Steve Witkoff, the negotiator for the U.S. in all of this, apparently giving a Russian official advice on how to sell the approach that they're looking for to Donald Trump. Witkoff also apparently said to the Russians, there's got to be this kind of land swap and that kind of land swap and so forth. And who knows where this is? Well, I thought maybe Max does. What of it? It seems like a mess to me, Max, but perhaps you see the genius underlying the U.S. strategy.
I think the only word that does justice to the Trump administration's attempts to negotiate an end to the war in Ukraine, David, is FUBAR, effed up beyond all recognition. And it's been extra FUBAR like the last week. It's been, I would call it a comedy of errors, except the consequences are so potentially deadly. It's not a laughing matter, but the ineptitude and the ham-handedness of the Trump administration truly defies description, because, this actually broke last weekend while Rosa and I were both at the Halifax International Security Forum, and there was a bipartisan Senate delegation there, and there were representatives from many U.S. allies in Europe and Canada and elsewhere, and everybody was startled. Nobody knew what the hell was going on, and in fact, what we've since learned is that even Secretary of State Marco Rubio didn't really know what was going on, because what we thought was going on was that, more than a month ago, Trump finally decided to get tough with Putin. He finally recognized that Putin was not interested in peace, and so we needed to apply some pressure. So Trump applied sanctions on a couple of Russian oil companies, gave Ukraine permission to fire ATACMS into Russia, and so we thought that he was finally getting tough with Russia, but no. Then this 28-point peace plan breaks, which turns out was negotiated in secret with Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner, and Kirill Dmitriev, who is the head of the Russian Sovereign Wealth Fund. And, we don't know exactly where this document was produced, but it could have easily been written in Moscow, because it was so favorable to the one side in this conflict, which was Russia. I mean, among other things, it would grant Putin's army territory, which it hasn't been able to conquer, and which it won't be able to conquer anytime soon. It imposed limitations on the size of the Ukrainian armed forces. It was just a horror show all around. It was asking all of these concessions from Ukraine, and Russia wasn't making any concessions of its own. And so then this thing kind of blew up over the weekend, and I think what happened was that Marco Rubio got directly involved in these negotiations in Geneva, and he was able to reel it back. And then he finally sat down with the Ukrainians and came up with another peace plan, which is only 19 points now, which has not been released yet. But the new peace plan is supposedly satisfactory to the Ukrainians, which means that the Russians will not accept it. And so what we've been watching the last week is this truly bizarre spectacle. When we hear about Ukraine peace negotiations, but the negotiations are not with Russia, which is the only country that can actually end the war in Ukraine. The negotiations are between the U.S. and Ukraine, just to try to get a unified position to deal with Russia. So there's been a ton of motion, activity, but there has been no progress. This is a complete waste. And in fact, if anything, this is achieving the Kremlin's objectives because it's sowing doubt about Trump's commitment to the Ukrainian cause. Well justified doubt. It's driving divisions between the U.S. and Europe and between the U.S. and Ukraine, and it's not achieving anything. And now the latest turn, which you referred to, is what happened yesterday when Bloomberg leaked this bizarro transcript between Steve Witkoff and Yuri Ushakov, who is one of Putin's top aides. And Witkoff, who was supposed to be the U.S. envoy to Russia, was acting a lot like the envoy from Russia because he was giving Ushakov advice on how to manipulate Trump. And one of the pieces of advice he gave was to have Putin call Trump right before Zelensky came to the White House, which is what happened. And remember, before that meeting at the White House with Zelensky, there was talk about the U.S. giving tomahawks to Ukraine and getting really tough with Russia. And then all of a sudden, Trump talks to Putin before Zelensky shows up, and all this talk of tomahawks goes away. So I would say what Witkoff is trying to achieve, he was successful in blocking this initiative to provide better weaponry to Ukraine, but that's not helpful to the cause of peace. And one of the astonishing things in that transcript, if you read it, is that Witkoff actually says, I believe that Putin wants peace. I believe that Russia really wants peace. What is that based on? If Putin wanted peace, he could end the war right now. Just call off the army. Stop bombarding Ukraine and killing innocent civilians. That's how you show you want peace. As long as he's continuing to kill innocent Ukrainian civilians, he clearly does not want peace. But Witkoff kind of extends the benefit of the doubt. So is it any wonder we're not making any progress by negotiating an end to this conflict when we have such a clueless envoy who is so easily duped by the Kremlin?
Do you care to speculate who the leaker of the transcript is?
I have no idea, but remember, during Trump's first term, there was a whistleblower in the White House who leaked the transcript of Trump's extortionate call with President Zelensky, where he was trying to blackmail Zelensky into maligning Joe Biden and threatening him with a cutoff of U.S. aid if he didn't. So clearly there was a whistleblower from the CIA, I believe, who was shocked at the way that Trump was going against U.S. interests and acting in a way that no president should act. And so I think, he notified authorities in the transcript leak. So maybe something like that is happening here, but I really don't know.
Yeah, although this was obviously a conversation between an American and a Russian. An American who I might point out is noted for using his personal phone on these trips and taking them with him.
No, I mean, I'm sure the NSA has transcripts of every single one of these calls, so it's just a question of who's leaking them.
Right. And there's some speculation that it was a foreign intelligence service, which would be interesting as well. Rosa, this does sound pretty FUBAR. I don't want to use crude language like Max, but it's pretty FUBAR. But, there seems to me to be one other problem here, and that is that hard as it may be to get it to an agreement with the Russians never actually honor their agreements.
You say that like I mean,
it does make this a bit challenging, doesn't it?
And of course, neither does the U.S. anymore. So we're pretty much even, right? I mean, this is the full Putinization of the United States. The Ukrainians are concerned with a good deal of justification that we won't honor whatever agreements we made. And Max has already run through some of the flip-flops and contradictions and we've had just in the last week or so. But Vladimir Zelensky is in a very tough spot. He's facing intense domestic pressures as a result of corruption scandals within his own government. People are not too happy with him. Well, as I understand it, he has not himself been directly implicated in this scandal. Some who are close to him have been implicated, which is increasing the pressure on him domestically to please people, to bring home something good. And meanwhile, he's getting squeezed by Trump, he's getting squeezed by Putin, and worse, he's getting squeezed in a totally incoherent way. So it's not even obvious what he would need to do to get anything useful. I think this is a real moment of crisis for Ukraine because we seem, over the weekend at Halifax, there was also another micro kerfluffle when one of the senators, one of the Republican senators, was speaking, and he said, "Oh, Marco Rubio told me that the original 28-point peace plan was not even an American document; it was a Russian document." At which point, and then Marco Rubio said, "No, no, no, this is not true. It is totally American document." And this level of chaos and confusion obviously makes any kind of negotiations just excruciating for the Ukrainians, who I think are facing the real possibility that this round of negotiations will fail, and that they will essentially be on their own with whatever help the Europeans can provide, which is probably not quite enough. Although, that being said, I think the Ukrainians have surprised the world before by managing to go on and even have successes, even at moments when we all thought, "Oh, there's no way they're cooked. They're cooked now." But no, I mean, it's tragic, it's awful, and it's really hard to feel optimistic about the future.
Yeah, I would point out, by the way, I read an Economist story about the corruption scandal today, and it was, talking about how outrageous it was that there was a corruption scandal going on for, this one party in this negotiation. And I thought to myself, well, yeah, it's a bad scandal, but Russia and the United States are way more corrupt. I mean, there's corruption publicly going on in both places.